we've built an MVP because we had a good idea how it should look like at the end. So we've had like 3 days to had actually the support from the commerce layer people to remotely so to answer questions. But we've been able in those 3 days actually to build up like a first store where we could sell a few things, where we could return something, where we've been able sort of to use the order management in the way we intended it.
You're listening to Inside Commerce, a weekly e-com strategy, technology and CX focused podcast hosted by experienced digital consultants and re-platform specialists James Gurd and Paul Rogers. Get insights into e-com strategy of leading brands, hear from industry thought leaders and leading tech vendors with practical advice to help you improve your online CX. This episode is sponsored by Shopify. Another week, another fantastic guest and interesting discussion. We're talking about digital revolution, how VIU rebuilt its e-com stack to improve customer experience through smarter automation and connectivity. Sounds like a mouthful, but it's actually really important because we know lots of businesses that go through digital transformation to varying degrees onto different tech stacks, and that brings different challenges. And hearing how people have approached it, what they've learned and giving you practical advice is really useful. So I'm really delighted to welcome Elian Kool, who's the CTO at VUI Eyeware. Hey, Elian, lovely to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation, James.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed chatting to you and our little preamble to get set up on this and hearing a bit about the brand story. So before we get into the talking about that digital revolution piece and the tech piece, let's get an introduction to you, VIU. Let's go about the brand story and what brought you to lead the team.
Let's get started with VIU. So VIU started actually back in 2013, so it's already quite a while back, but it was a very simple idea back then. So to change the eyewear industry by cutting out sort of all the unnecessary intermediaries and like re-offering high quality glasses directly to our customers. So we will work with boutique frame manufacturers, both in South Tyrol in Italy and in Japan, as well as with some of the top tier lens manufacturers in Switzerland and Germany, to really create outstanding quality at very fair prices. So initially, it really started as an online business. It was the very initial idea on that, but it has grown into a true omnichannel retail company where today we have around 50 stores across the DACH region. Or probably to say it in short, eyewear is very often overpriced because there's a very expensive distribution, and we're here to change that and make premium glasses more accessible.
Yeah, I love that because this is the thing I sometimes have struggled with as a consumer is I'll find a brand I like and maybe I can buy into its values. It's got some like ethical element to it, or it's got some, it's using really good materials, but then the price point is crazy high. And being able to deliver the quality at the price point is quite a compelling proposition.
And that really also resembles with our customers. And that's what we've seen now like, for the past 10 years. We've always did the designs ourselves. We use really the high quality frame manufacturers in those places where they really are origin from them, making sure that we get our cool designs in a high quality combined with the industry standard high quality lenses. That's really also what our customers are asking for and why they keep coming back and back to us.
Yeah, it was dangerous for me talking to you because as soon as I did, I went onto the site and I looked at the sunglasses because now we're starting to get some sunshine finally in the UK. It's like, looking at the Gambit and looking at these I was like, oh my word, this is going to be a fun challenge for me pre-summer to pick out the best one.
Yeah, no, indeed. Sunny season is always a strong season for us.
Yeah, well, people get happier and they feel better about spending money. So, let's get into the tech story because I'm fascinated by this. I love hearing how people go on change and when they have to make radical changes. And when you came in and you looked at consolidation and simplification, and you said that you focused on the principle that nobody does anything twice. And I think everyone listening this resonates where you might do one thing in one system, like somebody does some product work in an ERP, then they redo the product work in e-com or somewhere, and they might have to set up a discount once in a system, and then they have to then reset it up in a different one in order to get it launched. So with those principles, what were the key issues that you saw needed to be fixed?
As I joined, then I would say VIU suffered many of those issues that quite a few of our startups in the age of like 8 to 10 years, they typically get into that because some processes were just set up, I would say, in a very startup way. So if you needed something, you build it in a way that it somehow works, but you actually never adopt that to a real grown-up stage where you actually already are for quite a while. So there was just no clear master data management. And I would say the very basic one is just product data. But also, just as one example, if you offer an eye test in a store, you typically set the availabilities for that. When are people able to do an eye test in a specific tool? But actually, in reality, you already know that because you have in retail, you have a shift planning tool. So we actually know exactly who will be working when. We have the HR tool where we know exactly who is able, who's actually an optician who is able to do eye tests. So we have all that data, but nevertheless, because it's easier, you just create up an additional system and ask them to enter the same data twice, which obviously also is quite error prone. And that was one of the main principles. We want to make sure that everything is only on one place, whether it's store data, whether it's opening times, whether it's product data, whether it's availabilities of employees, etc., that nothing is entered twice in the system.
Yeah, I really like that, because a lot of the time when people plan change, it's planned on one part of the tech stack, and therefore it's not thinking about the data needs across a business, and therefore how you can consolidate centrally and then use modern tech, whether that's APIs or file transfer, whatever the mechanisms need to be, to ensure that you have an owner of each bit of data, and that owner is in control via a centralized system. So I like that vision.
Yeah, it was definitely also quite a hard change, because like in the past, just to illustrate that, I'm not sure whether it makes sense to elaborate too much, but like just to create a product actually was quite hard, because the major product data was owned by the product team, whereas marketing was setting up the product in the content management system or in the shop system. They were adding the images in a different FTP server, just naming them in the same way how the product number was looking like, and whether that actually came together or not was to some extent a bit like by chance. And really centralizing that has on one side a super big advantage, because you really have the validation and everything once. But on the other side, it's also people have to get used to the fact that once they're changing something, it actually has an impact everywhere. So for example, they're launching a new product and they forget to set to the proper start date, or the start date is moved to the back. Well, that has just the effect directly. The product will be visible on the website, but also available in the stores to sell. So with all the good things attached to it, that you also have to realize that what you're doing actually has a real immediate impact.
Yeah, another example I've come across well, I've known about it for a long time as an example of this, but I've seen it again in a new project. And sometimes you have to accept you can't do it all at once, but you don't lose track of the vision and the requirements, and you have them on post-launch things, is stockist data for a retailer that sells via other retailers, and they want to show where to buy on the line. You often find that a sales team have the data somewhere, an e-commerce team then take the data and rekey it, but there's no link. But you have modern tech, if you set up right, whether it's webhooks or whatever it is, or triggered events that go, we've updated here, push that now into the database over here, so that you don't have to rely on that manual process of, hey Joe in sales, has anything changed? Oh great, I'll update it in the back end admin of the e-com as well. And stockist data is always a mess.
And I mean, that's like actually an excellent example. I mean, like we had so many manual processes which even couldn't be done by the store teams themselves. Essentially, they wrote a ticket and the operations team did something, and stock was a constant issue in that. So it was actually like we constantly had to do inventories and to make sure what do we actually have. At the same time, it was never really sure. So what they've always done, especially if something was on low stock, then they just called the operations hub, which also was the warehouse back then, and asked, hey, do you still have from that? So they essentially had a constant phone line from the stores to the operations center to figure out what is actually the reality. And that is really what we've changed entirely with the approach.
Yeah, interesting. So let's talk about the that consolidation of process and tech, because having seen this in various sized businesses, it can be really confusing sometimes to know where you start and what order, because like I remember you saying to me, like lots of stuff are being patched together. You get all these dependencies where it's like, I call it whack-a-mole. You change something over here and then something goes wrong over there. Like, whoa, didn't know that was going to. So how did you approach it to identify what to change and what to prioritize so you didn't create massive disruption?
So, I mean, as I looked at it, and as I then sort of presented my findings afterwards also to the board, I used the pictures of a Chinese favela, where they build the house and then they attach a balcony and they add an additional story and something in addition. So the whole thing was indeed like over those 10 years being patched together. So And then again, like from a tech perspective, what we learn in school and university is you do all those things step by step. Instead of big bang approaches, that's way too dangerous. If you do many things at the same time, there's way too many things that will break. There will be interference in the business. So we've actually took exactly that step, because going down the route and saying, hey, we're taking now first the product data management and then this part and then this part, that would have been a journey of 7 years, which the company just wouldn't have been able to afford. Almost sort of on the good side, because we knew we want to change so many things, we've actually took the approach to say we're building a new company in the company almost. So it was not only a tech project, but we also sort of redone all the processes. So at the same time, we've outsourced the warehouse. We changed the entire way how we do fulfillment processes. We changed the entire definition of how an SKU looks like. So before we just had article numbers, which also were the same between Sunnies and frames. So it was actually quite hard to know what you actually have. But we've did all that change at the same time, which then essentially led sort of to the way we're not changing sort of system by system, but we're changing store by store. That means sort of for now, April last year, we started with the first pilot store, and the first pilot store then was booked out of the old inventory. We didn't inventory the new system, and from that moment on, that store was fully being served by the new system. So that means both like on the sales side, but also back to the ERP system where all the finances have been managed. So it was like 2 entire systems that were set up, and the migration path was essentially store by store that we moved over. And either a store was still in the old world, which also meant they had stock of the old world, or it was entirely in the new world, which then also was served by the stock and all the processes of the new world.
What do Mattel, Victoria Beckham, Sennheiser, and Glossier all have in common? They power their businesses with Shopify. Shopify is the most innovative and scaled commerce platform on the planet. It also happens to have the best converting checkout on the planet. Shopify, powering the future of enterprise commerce. Find out more at shopify.com/enterprise.
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of the don't try big bang. If there is a fundamental reason why you have to, then you have to plan around it and accept there's going to be risk. But I'm working with a pet care brand at the moment. I really like their approach as well, which is their number one priority is to migrate from the old ecom platform to the new one and not complicate it by adding loads of other stuff and get that right. But as part of that, fix known issues. And the product data model was one of the key ones of let's get the product data model set up correctly around SKUs, bundles, product tags, hierarchies as part of that process. So we're in a cleaner state, but don't try and complicate it by adding all these other like integrations and things that aren't critical to trade.
Yeah, I mean, and there's some things that we thought that then only done a bit later on, like analytics side, etc. It came in only again on at the end of the year. But sort of if we migrated a store onto the new world, it really contained then the entire new process. Everything came from a new warehouse, but it was very much risk reduced because it was only affecting one single store. So also the load that was happening from that single store was quite overseeable. So we could really use that store also then to fine tune everything, make sure that all the processes work fine, that all the shipments work fine, that the software itself is working. Then we've essentially went on to the next country, so making sure that from each country we have that one store up and running, and then we've been sort of then managing the rollout relatively quickly at the end.
I love that. It's really good. I think this is really interesting for people listening to hear how people approach phasing, and there's different ways. But I love that store by store process because you get your process right and you learn from it. You tweak any issues before you start rolling everything else into it.
And that actually has been super, super important because in reality, the orders, obviously on day one, we had the first exception from something that actually should never happen, but it just happens. And we have so complex orders, also with all the changes that happen on the orders, etc. So there's almost only exception. Exception is the default, we've always been saying. So we really have to work with that, and you have to get real data of it, and you have to figure out how are people actually using it. For example, the whole goods entry, we've built it in a way we haven't been really happy, but we said, hey, we actually don't know right now what's the best way. So let's ship it to the first store, and then let's just watch them how they're doing it. And in the moment we've seen what they've actually been doing with the new tool, it was immediately crystal clear. What do we need to do? Okay, then let's change that now quickly. And as it was only one store, and we've been working quite closely with them, we've also been able to make changes from today to tomorrow, and really making sure that we get it right for all the rest of the stores.
Yeah, it's nice. I think the e-com industry has been guilty of talking about agility as a generic term, and it doesn't always mean anything. But that, to me, is true agility. It's not just about sprints and development release. Agility is around process. It's around ways of working. It's about learning quickly and adapting quickly before you've built something massive and gone, oh shit, we've got to unpick this now.
I think that really has been one of the main learnings. So you can't, especially like where orders are that complex. Obviously, if you just have something you sell over the shelf and you probably return it and that's it, that's probably relatively straightforward. But all the other complex processes around that, it really makes most sense to come up with a minimum viable product, figure out how they actually use it, and then extend it in those areas where it makes sense.
Yeah, excellent. And let's get into that tech journey and where you ended up in the core ecom platform, because as you'd said, it was quite a convoluted tech journey of like lots of different things being bolted on and various tech stacks being considered. And you ended up with Commerce Layer, and a big shout out to Seth Bindernagel, who's a long-term friend of the podcast, who introduced us and said this would, it'd be a really interesting brand story. But yeah, how did you get to Commerce Layer? Because there's so many platforms and options in the market.
So one decision that we've took from the very beginning on is that we really want and need to be in control of the interface. So on the screen that the stores are seeing, our business, and I mean probably many businesses are saying that, but we have a few very, very specific demands, like with the whole eyewear stuff. We have lenses, we exchange them, we upgrade them, we downgrade them. So it would have been impossible to implement that based on a normal POS system, because what typically opticians have, they have then one sales system and one system where they order lenses. So that's two totally separate systems. So in our evaluation that we had, I would say, two key criteria. The first one was flexibility. So we looked for headless commerce systems, and they are essentially all built for online sales. But we said, hey, whatever we want to build, as long as we can cater for our stores, we will be able to do it online. We're not so worried about that. Our online business is not that difficult. So if we get it right with the stores, we will get it right for the online business. So we really were looking for a headless commerce solution, which was flexible enough that we could use them for the stores. And that was the real critical part. So how many things does as a solution assume that it's just the way it is? And many of them, they were so online driven, it actually was quite hard even to imagine how do you put the store in there. And the second part was the order management. Order management, many of the commerce suites, they say order management is a different type of beast. We don't do that. You need to go to a system XYZ and do that there. But in our case, because we have so many returns, we have exchanges, etc., the order management is such an integral part to what we're doing. And I had very much a feeling, and actually, like in retrospect, I would say even more, it was one of the most important decisions. As he said, the order management really needs to be very close to the sales part, and it needs to belong to a sale. If we have a different system for order management, that would make it so much more complicated for us to build that whole application, that we actually wouldn't know whether we would succeed in that, especially in the time. So I would say flexibility from a headless API perspective, or to really build the whole store experience, and the order management side to be really neatly integrated into the core commerce part. That was sort of our two key criteria. And with those, there's actually not that many left.
And this shows the importance of it. And I speak to so many business about this, is you don't start off by saying, I want to be on platform X. You start off by going, what are my business critical risks of if I get this right? What is my project? Is it a selling online project? Is it an omni-channel project? Is it a customer experience project? And therefore, what are the critical dependencies? Because that, you're right, you filter down to like maximum of 2 or 3 instantly by getting those questions answered properly.
Yeah, I mean, what we also done that obviously was we didn't just believe that because we knew that we were building something that they probably haven't built before with a customer in the way how we plan to do it. So the first thing was that we've done was just to build an MVP on that because we had a good idea how it should look like at the end. So we've took like a week or so, actually less. I guess we had like 3 days. But we also had actually the support from the commerce layer people remotely, so to answer questions. But we've been able in those 3 days actually to build up sort of kind of like a first store where we could sell a few things, where we could return something, where we've been able sort of to use the order management part in the way how we intended it, because we have to assemble the glasses at the end as well. We're actually essentially creating a shipment per glass, and everything needs to come together, and that's like one piece that needs to be worked on. So we've really been like within the first 3 days able to show that we are able with the basic model to do that, and with a few smaller adaptations that actually went in relatively smoothly.
Excellent. So let's probe a bit more on that, because one of the areas we talked about is corrections, order changes. They are challenging because in most businesses, it's basically, right, cancel first order, create new order. How are you using CommerceLens to help you with that order management piece?
So probably I would say the whole after sales area, like around glasses, is like the important part. And we have essentially in the after sales world, we have warranty where we say, there's something broken, relatively simple. We just reordered the same product. Essentially in commerce layer, we just recreate in the same order, we recreate a new shipment, which does like everything, like how it is being transported, also probably from the warehouse to the store, to essentially reorder the same piece without any financial implications. Then obviously there's returns, but what it makes really complicated is sort of, we call it the goodwill or intolerance exchange. So you buy a pair of glasses, and after a week you're coming back and somehow it doesn't fit exactly. So that can be a mistake in the prescription. It can be that you've even like depending on if you have a metal frame, that you have an intolerance with the metal frame. So we are exchanging that actually relatively for a long time. So in that case, also it's not only exchanging something, but it's also, it could be the new product could be more expensive. It could be cheaper than before. So what we essentially built based on that is it logically does create a new order, but it is logically connected to the initial order, which also allows us then to do a payment. So in reality, it does create a return internally, and returns sort of the value of that frame onto a gift card, and the new order is automatically being paid with that gift card. With that, we also have the real link for that. We also have the real payment data on top of it. For example, if the exchange would be more expensive, or we could also do then essentially a refund of the rest of the gift card if it became cheaper. So all those ways we've actually been able quite well to model that within the data model of commerce layer.
Nice. I think it's about simplification for the people handling it on a day-to-day, isn't it? And let's talk about some other ways of like improving through automation, because when we were discussing this podcast, you're talking about they wanted to create efficiency, basically. So can you share some examples where you're using the new tech stack to automate key processes or removing points of failure? One example you gave me is about the automation of lens ordering, which I hadn't thought would be so complicated.
Yeah, that's exactly. Initially, that sounds like if you hear it out, it sounds very easy. Now, in most applications, it actually is the case that you have like a sales system where you say, okay, I want to have like a complex correction, I want to have this, and that, and then you have a totally separate system which is often provided by a lens supplier, where you actually order the lens, and they're not really connected with each other. Now, we are ordering from multiple lens suppliers, and we said we actually really want to have that connected to make sure that we are not doing any mistakes. So in the past, it used to be the case that in the stores, they've only done sort of the initial sales piece, and that everything went to our operations center. And the operations center actually took that and then manually ordered the right lens for that based on various Google Sheets and stuff like that. And like initially, as we said, okay, that's the first thing we need to automate. And they were like, no, you can't automate that. That doesn't work. And I was like, so what you're telling me essentially is it's like you order lenses by gut feeling. No, of course not. There's science behind that. So okay, if there's science behind that, we can automate it. So we went behind that. I mean, we have at the moment around 1,800 different combinations that we have what we order on lenses. But broken down to the minimum of decisions that you have to take, which obviously every optician easily can take, but then fully integrated into, and that's like the reason why we call it not a POS, but the POE for point of everything system, which automatically based on the sales process, you choose the frame, you choose your prescription, you choose what type of lens you want to have, and it automatically calculates from which supplier we could order them. And an optician can change if he wants to. The lens supplier needs to give a reason. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. For example, if you have a son and the normal prescription glasses, you want to have the same supplier. So you can influence it to some extent, but it's everything sort of predefined, like what's the default supplier we have for that combination, etc. So it's a relatively complex process behind that.
I love that. I worked on a project a few years back, a jewelry company who did like custom engagement rings. And at face value, when you think about buying a ring, it's simple. I'll pick my size, job done. But actually, the engagement is very similar to what you're saying. There's complexity of logic around what combinations fit and how that drives price and price change. And I remember working with Tom and Co with the Magento agency and an amazing lead engineer architect called Jakob, who what you did in Ecommerce basically spent the time to understand the logic and the data rules, to map them out, to define, which then enabled the smart people in that business, including Jakob, to create the programming that then calculate. And when you spend that time in technical discovery and spend a bit more money, a bit more time, a bit more effort, the savings you get later on are massive.
Exactly, and just like the mistakes that you make with ordering wrong lenses, which you anyway have to pay, that's a massive saving. Also, like for example, like depending on if you have like a large frame and depending on your view height, and depending on the prescription data, it works or it doesn't work. So all those things that we're actually able to calculate that up front and figure out, does that work or doesn't it work? Can we do that? What kind of do we need thin glasses for that or not, depending on prescription? So all those things to have like a real rule set behind that, which obviously the opticians in the workshop they have had that, so they've done that or just all manually, which also means like between the countries actually it was not ever being done in exactly the same way, because there's always multiple truths and there's always like those things that we actually had them to agree on. Okay, look guys, now get together. In Germany we're doing it that way, in Switzerland we're doing it that way. Figure out what the truth should be, because in the future there's only one truth.
Yeah, I love that. Now it's a really good kind of, there's great soundbite to take away from this episode for people is it's challenging current ways of doing things, because we all get into bad habits, not through bad reasons, but because pressure, time, everything. And to replicate bad process into a new tech stack is just, it does not make sense.
No, and that is actually spot on. And that's also, we actually didn't even look at, we went that far, we didn't look at the old processes. We actually didn't care. We just essentially wrote up, okay, what does the process need to do? Okay, we need to be able to assemble glasses for this, that. Like for some parts, and for example, like if you have a shiny glass, a shiny frame, you're able to matte in it. And that obviously can be only done in the workshops where they actually have all the devices. So all those rules that they are behind, but in reality, we all know what's happening and we are all looking behind that.
Yeah,
and essentially sketching that process, and especially the after sales process was a big challenge, obviously, with all those variations. But then sketching up that process really from scratch, and then figuring out how do we implement that. That was one of the most important things I would say that we've done, and really not seeing it as just a tech project. It was fully from beginning on a tech and process project.
Yeah, and this is where engineering leads, not just developers, but the engineering leads, you've got the architectural vision and the strategic lens, are worth their weight in gold in projects, because it's that, okay, how do we deliver this best? Because everyone can build a solution, but building the right solution takes thinking to come out and iron out all the nuances.
And one thing is capability, and the other part is actually what power do you have? What can you do? And I would say that was really one of the big advantages. So we've had sort of the full power over everything, and we could change everything in the way how we thought it was best.
Yeah, excellent. So let's come back to that after sales process, because you said you made improvements to the after sales process, and that helped you like reduce back office costs. Can you talk us through what you did and what impact it had on the business?
So in the past, essentially, that was every after-sales process, and that was writing a ticket. So no one actually, so it wasn't really being done too much in the system, but essentially everything had to do then with manual work of the operations team. Even like with normal sales orders, more than 50% of all orders had a ticket attached to it, which means that the operations team manually had to do something with that. So what we've done essentially, because we were able to really bring all those processes fully into the application, and the principle we've applied from the very beginning on is that I don't want any functionality which the stores are not able to do themselves, which means we also had to build them in a very simple way, because you don't want to train like a workforce of like 200-300 people on that. But it had to work for them. So I didn't want to have any functionality where they would have to go back to a support team and say, hey, can you do this, this, and that for me? So the default answer always had to be, no, you can do it yourselves. So, and really bringing all those things that before they wrote a ticket, oh, okay, someone will do it for me. Suddenly they were able to do it fully themselves. Which obviously, also from the beginning on, it was like for them kind of a pro and a con. On one side, they could serve the customer directly. On the other side, they actually had to do it. And there was no one controlling what they've done. So there was a bit like less double checking on that. But we obviously checked many things from a technical perspective. So they barely could do any mistakes for that. But making sure that really all the functionality is part of a very simple interface, we've been able to hugely improve the cost on the whole operations process, because we don't need that many people anymore.
And let's get to a specific bit of technology, because you talked about go headless was the right architectural approach. You got to commerce layer, and you've adopted a composable strategy to have like elements that fit together well to deliver the capabilities. And Sanity, I know, is a critical part. It's your source of truth for content. So how are you using Sanity, and like what changes this had on the business from a like content management point of view?
If people hear Sanity, they immediately think website CMS. So that's essentially what it's built for. But we're having a relatively small team. So one principle was also, we don't want to have a specific tool for each and every use case, but we want to use a tool if we use it for many, many use cases. So in the meantime, we're using Sanity also as a website CMS, but our first use cases were actually to manage the whole product data and to manage our stores. So essentially, instead of using an off-the-shelf product data management tool, we've built that on top of Sanity. I would say actually in a relatively complex way. So we have products, we have variants of it, we have sort of designs which can make up the variants. We have all the prices in there which come in directly from Business Central, from the price master system. But everything sort of from the very beginning on, if the product team is sort of creating their first prototypes, until the very marketing material, everything is sort of fully managed based on Sanity for that. And sort of once we activate it in Sanity, the SKUs are pushed into commerce layer to be able to sell it, and TypeSense, which we're using as a catalog system or search and everything, which empowers both sort of the store application as well as the website.
Oh, interesting. So you've created a component in Sanity with the logic to control the product data structure and pushing the data into it, so that it then displays it how you need to in the front end.
Exactly. So whereas in Sanity, we really have sort of that product and variation model, and that is being flattened into a SKU model for the product catalog. Because then mostly we're actually talking about single SKUs, although they're obviously still being held together. But if we want to sell it, it's anyway a SKU. But if we, for example, want to generate a Google product data catalog, it's all SKU based. So everything that runs after the data management is SKU based. So we actually do a translation if it's being activated in Sanity. We'll translate that only into SKUs, and those single SKUs are then being held in TypeSense, which we use then sort of as a product catalog to browse that.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. And composable is often associated with large engineering teams. Rightly or wrongly, it is. Can you talk us through your team size structure for development?
Yeah, that's indeed a question also we're getting quite often. So as I joined, I would say there was quite an engineering team, which is way too large for what has to be done. So we've reduced that quite heavily. So essentially, we had a team of 2, which were more like sort of product owner, business analyst type of people, 3 software engineers, a UX and a product developer, designer, and myself. And sort of with that team of 7, we've rebuilt sort of in those 18 months, like everything from sort of the core commerce, the product data management, changed the whole transaction signatures, what you need for POS systems in Germany and in Austria, built the whole point of everything application, the website, appointment booking, data warehouse, analytics, website, outsourced the warehouse, changed fulfillment processes. So I would say it was a relatively lean team for that. For what we've accomplished within those 18 months.
Yeah, that seems quite incredible. And that's, you're not using any external development like resource in addition to that, like agencies to back up or outsource parts to it. It's all internally in your team.
No, it was fully done internally. The only exception was for the ERP system. So where we also migrated from Navigation to Business Central. That's where we used a consulting partner. Everything else, including all the designs also for the website and for the application, were fully done in-house, which also in that speed, I think it would have been quite difficult to integrate externals with that as well.
Yes, yeah, that process-wise, that gets really challenging, especially to manage like the development pipelines at the speed. And interestingly, I speak to a lot of, I find it fascinating the cadence of which engineering teams release, because you go back a few years and you'd have a big release every 2 or 4 weeks. Then people started to go, well, we could release every week. And then actually some businesses who truly adopt this kind of more agile approach to development are potentially releasing every single day, if not multiple times a day. How do you approach it? What is your kind of frequency, or does it change depending on the business needs?
Initially, it was always multiple times a day. Obviously, we had to have to fix, again, like an exception, we need to change something. Okay, let's ship it quickly. So we've, like initially, I would say we deployed probably even like 8 to 10 times a day to production. Today we're probably down to, I would say, pretty much daily. There's a few exceptions. If having something on test that we don't want to deploy, then we probably don't deploy once for 2 days or so. But in general, we deploy at least once a day, often more than once a day.
Yeah, and I think I know a lot of senior econ people who are used to coming from legacy tech stack world, where actually then getting your head around weekly is a bizarre thing, because still most of the times it's 2-week sprints, but daily, a lot of people go, how can you possibly do that and manage the code and make it the deployment's accurate so you don't create all this QA overhead? What I guess what's your advice on that? How do you do that without creating so much QA work that it slows you down?
Yeah, we actually also never planned in sprints, because there were so many things that changed in priority. So actually managing sprints would have been at the end just an overhead. We were working with a quite normal Kanban style. And everyone had sort of his top priorities. We shipped as quickly as possible, as crazy as possible, making sure that we are testing everything at the same time. So although the POs or the business analysts, they were also working on essentially on the QA side for that. Although we had a dedicated QA initially, the complexity of those things is so high that it was almost impossible for them to actually create valid tests for that. Now, the big advantage also of a store application is that you have a whole test crew out there with your own employees, and in combination with we're able to ship other changes pretty quickly. We've also had quite a few things where you said, okay, it's good enough. We've tested it with a few edge cases, but now for the real test, we'll ship that out. We'll say, hey, look, here is the first version of that. Test that, give us feedback, and we've done that quite constantly. And I would say initially they had to get used to it a bit, but that actually worked super well, and also the quality of feedback increased quite heavily. So we've been working there also quite dynamically with the people. Like I said, at the moment we rather have to make sure that we again goes a bit more into operations mode, and that we're not getting all the feedback from everything what they would want to have on a daily basis anymore.
I find that really interesting. I love the fact that every business has a different approach, especially when people got internal engineering. I'm going to finish around like the customer experience theme, because I know that's been a really important driver of this change and the technology section piece. But you touched on it earlier about point of everything is like the North Star for the business. Can you give the listeners a bit of context? What does point of everything actually mean in the context of the customers?
Absolutely. So, first of all, in terms for the employee, or for the stuff in the store. And before, they had essentially an order application. They used PrestaShop to manage the orders. They used Navision for the day-end closing. They had another tool for the appointments. Inventories and many other things were done via Google Sheets. And again, like I mentioned before, for 50% of the orders, they anyway had to write a ticket and ask someone else to do something. So for us, it was really to bring all those things together. So whether it's sales, whether it's after sales, the inventory management, appointment booking, the campaign management, the day-end closing, the analytics, and the whole store KPIs, etc., etc. So everything that the store somehow needs to do during an entire week, that should be done via the application. And I'd say we've succeeded actually quite well with that.
Okay, no, I think it's so important to have a concept that you can pin stuff around, because I guess that's the success criteria. Are we achieving our vision?
Yeah. And just probably to give like one concrete example, what that means. So for example, for the appointment booking. So if you have like separate tools, it's separate tools. In our case, because we've also integrated, we're obviously using a separate system in the backend for that, but we're using the same front-end system. So in the sales system, like you have like a header where you see, oh, what is my next upcoming appointment? So also while selling, you actually know, do I have an appointment in the next 10 minutes or so? You obviously tap that appointment. You're directly logged in as that customer. Although they registered via an appointment booking system, the customer is already created in the commerce system. There's no data that needs to be transferred somehow. Everything is there. We know everything where the customer was coming from. The optician just has to add the prescription, and everything is being added automatically to the order. So those things, and really making those processes just way leaner, way faster, easier for the stuff in the stores, that has been proven to be super valuable.
Yeah, amazing, and helping them to better service customers. I'd love to know, because you talked a lot about technology change, operational efficiency, being able to deliver a better overall setup to label staff to deliver better service to customers, simplifying all of this stuff, which benefits the business, but also has a positive impact on customers. How are you getting feedback loops to know what impact it's having on the customers and how they're perceiving it and how it's benefiting them? And what do you see in like the customer behavior that says, actually, do you know what, we're going in the right direction? This is landing well with customers as well.
And it's really a bit twofold, because we are essentially a drive-to-store business. So also for the website, the number one target isn't even to sell much more via the website, but we want to drive the people to the stores. So one of the things that we are looking at is essentially then obviously conversion rate in the stores. Are we sending the right customers to the stores? Do we get the right customers there? But also online, I would say pretty much with the typical KPIs, making sure what are they doing. In our case, because we have lots of prescription data, we actually know about the customer and whether he's coming back. And if he is logged on once, we have a very good idea of whether he actually will come back, whether he orders something later on. If he had, for example, an experience with exchanging a lens, is he coming back? Is he not coming back? So we have lots of data on the customer directly with that helps us. But we're obviously also using other tools to figure out sort of where are people dropping on the website, what doesn't work with them. We're constantly monitoring the website also for what happens. We have lots of historic data where we figure out, or where we know sort of what have been the typical ratios in the past, and monitoring quite extensively against that.
Amazing. Interesting. Yeah, I guess there's so many data points on there where you can measure customer satisfaction, customer experience, and impact. Elian, I've really, really enjoyed it. I mean, I could carry on asking questions for hours, but I know you're a very busy man. So I should be very respectful of that and not take up too much of your time. But I've really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. I love the brand as well. I love the story that you've shared, and I know that listeners will get a lot of value out of it. And I do recommend anyone going and checking out the prescription sunglasses. Are beautiful. You'll get hooked to browsing them just as I have. So yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast, Elian.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure. Thanks a lot, and looking forward for further episodes.
Excellent. And to everyone listening, hope you enjoyed it. Do reach out. Any questions, want to probe further. And I guess if anyone's out there who's been looking at Headless Compose One, considering something like Commerce Layer, and wants to ask a few more questions about the practicalities of it, feel free to connect. I'm sure Elian's speaks very eloquently about that whole change management process.
Would be a real pleasure. And I mean, we've also been in contact with quite a few sort of competitors from in the landscape, and it's always been super interesting exchanges on that. I'm happy to exchange experiences on that.
Cool. Thank you.
You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gurd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-com strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.